In the ancient fields of Israel, a young man rode with the distinct posture of royalty. This was Absalom, a prince with immense ambition and a deep desire for greatness. He was famous throughout the kingdom for his striking appearance, particularly his thick, heavy hair, which drew admiration wherever he went. Absalom looked the part of a future ruler, carrying a quiet conviction that he was the superior choice to inherit the throne over his older brother, Amnon. His relationship with his father, King David, was bound by genuine affection, but affection alone rarely satisfies ambition. Despite the king's love, Absalom felt overlooked, harboring a persistent belief that he was owed more attention and respect than he received. A young leader with high potential and a loving family might seem secure, but when a deep sense of entitlement goes unchecked, it builds a fragile psychological foundation, ready to crack under the first real test of character. That test arrived in the form of a severe family trauma. Absalom's sister, Tamar, was assaulted and deeply hurt by their older brother, Amnon. The situation demanded immediate, decisive intervention from the top. Instead, King David failed to act. He offered no punishment and no resolution, creating a sudden vacuum of justice within the palace. Left in that silence, Absalom's grief quickly curdled into a furious, festering anger. 2 years passed. Absalom didn't shout or make demands. He calculated. He threw a grand feast, specifically inviting Amnon. At the height of the celebration, when his brother was distracted and vulnerable, Absalom ordered his servants to attack. Amnon was killed. Knowing exactly what he had done, and terrified of his father's wrath, Absalom abandoned his royal life and fled the kingdom entirely, seeking asylum in a distant territory. When severe trauma is met with institutional silence rather than open communication and accountability, the injured parties often take justice into their own hands. By trying to avoid a difficult conflict, David practically guaranteed a catastrophic chain reaction. Absalom spent the next several years living as an exile. He was entirely severed from his home, his family, and the power structures of Jerusalem. Back in the capital, King David was locked in a state of emotional paralysis. The historical records suggest he deeply missed Absalom, yet the sheer weight of forgiving a son for the premeditated murder of his own brother proved too heavy to navigate. Meanwhile, Absalom was not using his exile for quiet repentance. In those years of isolation, he transformed his goal from a homecoming into an active coup, focusing his energy on seizing his father's throne. Physical distance rarely heals deep wounds on its own. Without the hard, uncomfortable work of emotional repair, isolation acts as an incubator, turning personal resentment into active, calculated rebellion. When Absalom finally orchestrated his return to Jerusalem, he didn't head for the throne room to reconcile. He positioned himself at the city gates, deliberately intercepting citizens as they arrived to bring their disputes to the king. This balance illustrates Jerusalem's shifting political weight. One side holds the heavy crown, representing David's slow institutional rule. The other holds citizens seeking relief. Absalom promised instant fairness, bypassing governance. He quickly hijacked the people's hearts, tipping the scales and leaving the traditional crown isolated. The boiling point arrived abruptly. Supported by a massive, loyal following, Absalom completely bypassed the line of succession and openly declared himself king. David was forced into an impossible corner. To fight his own son in Jerusalem would turn the capital's streets into a slaughterhouse. Choosing the survival of the city over his own immediate pride, David and his loyalists fled their home. The kingdom split in two without a single sword being swung. Absalom proved that unaddressed public grievances are far more potent than any standing army, capable of fracturing a nation's unity from within. But a physical confrontation was inevitable. Deep in a heavily wooded forest, Absalom's rebel supporters violently clashed with David's seasoned, loyal army, commanded by the brilliant and ruthless General Joab. As the battle turned against the rebellion, Absalom panicked. He spurred his horse through the dense timber to escape. In a brutal twist of irony, his famous thick hair, the very symbol of his vanity and royal image, whipped up and became hopelessly snarled in the thick branches of an oak tree. His horse kept running, leaving the would-be king dangling in midair. King David had issued strict, explicit orders to all his commanders to spare Absalom's life. General Joab didn't care. Finding the rebel prince trapped and defenseless in the branches, Joab drew his weapon and struck Absalom down, ending the insurrection on the spot. Leaders can start conflicts, but they rarely control how they finish. Once the machinery of war is set in motion, it operates by its own violent logic, routinely ignoring the limits set by the very people who unleashed it. The source text highlights the grim reality of the battle's aftermath. There was no triumphant victory parade in Jerusalem. King David was entirely consumed by agonizing grief, mourning a son he loved but failed to reach. This tragedy suggests that the initial silence following Tamar's assault was the real catalyst. When anger is left unvalidated early on, it finds much more violent ways to express itself later. It shows the massive difficulty and the necessity of choosing a peaceful path over retaliation. Both David and Absalom initially chose easier, quieter paths, only to find themselves meeting in this forest under the worst possible circumstances. Every decision made in the shadows of the palace added a new link to a chain of events that eventually spiraled beyond anyone's control. We often look outward for threats to our stability, but whether we are examining a vast nation or a single family, the greatest danger rarely marches through the front gate. It is the silent, unaddressed resentments allowed to echo within our own walls.